Imagine driving down the most vital international highway on Earth,
Right.
and your cargo is carrying, a fifth of the world's energy supply.
Yeah, a massive amount of resources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And suddenly you encounter this rogue, heavily armed toll booth, and they refuse your currency, threatening to just stop your journey right there unless you pay them in Bitcoin.
Which sounds completely surreal.
It does. Sounds like a scene from a cyberpunk novel or something.
Yeah.
But that isn't fiction. That is exactly what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz this morning.
Yeah, it is.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's special briefing. Our objective today is to provide you with a really clear, comprehensive, and objective overview of the rapid developments shaping the Middle East over the past 2 weeks.
Right, because things are moving incredibly fast.
You really are. So we are stepping into the roles of, I guess you'd say, your traditional news anchors today. We want to be calm, professional, and entirely focused on the facts on the ground.
Exactly. We'll be analyzing the primary patterns of this escalating conflict, the real-world impacts, and the specific courses of action that global decision makers are weighing right now.
Right, because in a geopolitical climate that moves this fast, the goal really is to cut through all the noise.
Absolutely. We're here to present the facts and the diverse perspectives without any bias and, importantly, without generating unnecessary fear. We want you to understand not just what is happening, but, the actual mechanics of why it matters.
Exactly. Now, before we jump into the analysis, just a quick message. This deep dive is sponsored by ProWave AI and is generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application.
Yes.
For your reference, the title of today's briefing is The Iran Crisis Brief, Gulf Tensions and Diplomacy. The region of focus is the Middle East, specifically Iran. And today's date is the 25th of May, 2026.
And it is definitely worth noting what is powering this briefing. The Stylo News application you're using is actually the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Right, the enterprise platform.
Yeah, exactly. It's an enterprise-level platform used by governments, the military, global business entities to track these exact scenarios. So you are getting unique access to the very same intelligence framework designed to support global decision makers in real time.
It's pretty incredible access. So let's start with the immediate geographic epicenter of this crisis. If you want to understand why global markets are experiencing such intense anxiety this week, you really have to look at the water.
Right, specifically the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the strait.
Which is, it's really the quintessential strategic choke point. To understand the gravity here, you just have to consider the sheer volume moving through it every single day.
Right, it's about 20% of the world's total oil supply, isn't it?
Yes, 20%. Along with massive, massive quantities of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, which all must transit through this really narrow waterway.
And LNG is critical. I mean, that's what powers the industrial grids of entire nations.
Exactly. So when you restrict that flow, you aren't just creating, a regional military issue. You are instantly threatening global energy supplies and the stability of the entire broader market.
And the data shows Iran is currently executing a highly coercive maritime strategy to do exactly that, right?
They are.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is actively claiming a, quote, supervision area over the strait. And they're threatening to impose tariffs on commercial shipping.
Right.
But the wild part is they are proposing to run this entire extortion operation via a Bitcoin-based insurance platform. Which, I mean, wait, how does a cryptocurrency insurance platform actually enforce anything on a massive physical oil tanker in the middle of the ocean?
Right. It seems disconnected, but it's actually a fascinating mechanism to bypass traditional finance. Think about how global shipping operates. A commercial vessel cannot dock in most major ports, nor can it operate legally without specialized maritime insurance.
Right, which is historically dominated by Western institutions like Lloyd's of London.
Exactly. So by heavily threatening the vessels that don't pay their supervision fee, Iran creates a severe risk environment.
Okay.
And then they turn around and offer to, quote unquote, insure that risk, demanding payment through this decentralized Bitcoin-based framework.
Oh, wow. So it completely circumvents Western-dominated financial systems like SWIFT.
You've got it. It allows Tehran to monetize the transit of global energy while totally insulating themselves from the heavy banking sanctions that are currently in place.
So they aren't actually trying to blow these commercial ships out of the water?
No, not at all.
They just want to cut the action. It's less like a traditional act of war and more like setting up an illegal, heavily armed toll booth on a global highway.
That's a great analogy.
They don't want to destroy the road. They just want to extort everyone driving on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the defining characteristic of this strategy, which military strategists call horizontal escalation.
Horizontal escalation.
Right. Iran is very carefully avoiding a direct conventional naval war that would, frankly, result in their immediate defeat. Instead, they're turning the geographical reality of the strait into a weapon to impose profound economic costs on the globe.
Which gives them immense negotiation leverage.
Huge leverage. And they get all of that without crossing the threshold of a direct, full-scale military confrontation.
Wow. Okay, I also noticed a single line in the briefing that feels massive, but almost flew under the radar. The reports indicate Iran is hinting at interfering with subsea internet cables located in the Gulf.
Yes, that's a huge point.
We always think of the Gulf in terms of oil, but what exactly is the digital infrastructure threat here?
It is a massive, highly critical vulnerability. The vast majority of global internet traffic, and we're talking international banking data, government communications, basic connectivity, all of that travels through physical cables resting right there on the ocean floor.
Right, not satellites, but actual cables.
Exactly. And several vital arteries run directly through the Persian Gulf. So by hinting that they might dredge up or sever these cables, Iran is expanding the hostage pool, so to speak.
So they're telling the world, we can disrupt your energy, and we can also sever your digital connectivity.
Precisely. It's a dual threat.
Well, if the U.S. and Western navies are caught in this delicate balancing act, trying to maintain pressure without triggering a war, who is actually stepping up to protect these commercial ships right now?
That's where we're seeing a really significant shift in regional maritime security. India has actually actively deployed naval forces under an initiative called Operation Urga Suraksha.
Okay, why India specifically?
Because a massive percentage of India's energy imports must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. They view this as a direct threat to their sovereign economic survival.
Oh, absolutely.
So they are taking unilateral steps to secure their own commercial vessels. It really demonstrates that global powers are no longer just sitting back and waiting for a traditional Western naval umbrella to solve the crisis.
They can't afford to wait. But, clamping down on the water is really only half the equation. If you squeeze a global choke point like Hormuz, the neighboring states sharing that coast aren't just sitting quietly.
No, they certainly aren't.
Let's look at the physical threats facing the land masses of the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC. The numbers regarding Iran's reconstituted military capacity are honestly pretty surprising.
They are very sobering. Following the significant military attrition Tehran suffered earlier in 2026, current analysis indicates Iran actually retains roughly 70% of its mobile missile launchers.
70%.
Yes. And furthermore, they have regained access to approximately 90% of their underground missile storage facilities along the strait.
Wait, how is it even possible they recovered 90% of their underground capacity so quickly after those strikes earlier this year?
It really comes down to geography and engineering. The Zagros mountain range along Iran's coast provides immense, just incredible natural protection. Yeah, their military infrastructure is not built in centralized, easily targetable warehouses. It is this vast, decentralized network of deep subterranean tunnels.
So even if you hit them.
Right. While the entrances or specific launchers might be damaged, the internal network and the stockpiles themselves remain largely intact, and they can be brought back online very rapidly. Their capacity for short warning strikes has been materially restored.
And we are seeing that newly restored capacity being tested across the GCC borders right now.
Yeah.
For example, on May 1st, Kuwait intercepted an armed IRGC commando team attempting to infiltrate Bubiyan Island.
Yes.
Why target that specific island?
Bubiyan Island sits right at the northern tip of the Persian Gulf. It essentially controls access to Kuwait's major waterways and a lot of their critical infrastructure projects.
Ah.
So attempting an armed infiltration there is a really clear way to probe Kuwait's perimeter defenses. It's a direct violation of sovereignty designed to project covert power and keep Kuwait's leadership highly anxious about their northern border.
It's constant pressure. And then moving south to Saudi Arabia, there have been multiple interceptions of drones. But the briefing says they aren't flying directly across the Gulf from Iran. They are entering from the Iraq approach corridor, targeting massive energy hubs like the Ras Tanura oil export terminal.
Right.
Why the detour through Iraq?
It is a very deliberate tactical move to complicate the defense. Saudi Arabia has heavily fortified its eastern coast, the side facing the Persian Gulf.
Because that's where they expect the threat.
Exactly. So by routing drones through Iraqi airspace, Iran utilizes its proxy networks and forces Saudi air defenses to monitor a much broader 360-degree perimeter.
That makes defense infinitely harder.
It does.
Yeah.
And targeting Ras Tanura is highly deliberate. It's one of the largest oil processing facilities in the entire world, the pumping heart of Saudi oil exports.
Which reinforces the whole strategy of imposing global economic pain.
Exactly. It all ties back to the economics.
Then there is the United Arab Emirates, which the data suggests is facing the highest immediate exposure. I keep hearing the UAE referred to in these reports under their doctrine of Little Sparta. It sounds like a compliment, but it seems to put a massive target on their back.
Well, the term Little Sparta refers to the UAE's history of really aggressively modernizing its military and its willingness to punch way above its weight in regional conflicts over the last decade.
Right.
Because of that proactive military posture and their close alignment with Western security interests, Tehran basically views them as a primary adversary in the immediate neighborhood.
And we've already seen drone strikes affecting the area near the Baraka nuclear power plant in the UAE.
Yes, which is incredibly alarming.
But the Emirates are pushing forward with a massive strategic countermeasure, accelerating the completion of the Fujairah oil pipeline. Where exactly does that pipeline go, and why does it matter so much right now?
If you picture a map of the Arabian Peninsula, the UAE sits right inside the Persian Gulf. The Fujairah pipeline is designed to originate near Abu Dhabi, physically bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely, and terminate on the eastern coast of the UAE.
Oh, emptying directly into the Gulf of Oman and the open Arabian Sea?
Exactly. So accelerating this project is a huge structural acknowledgement of their vulnerability. They are trying to guarantee their oil can reach global markets even if Iran completely shuts down the strait.
Okay, I have to pause here because there's a contradiction in all of this that needs explaining.
Sure.
If Iran has 90% of its underground missile facilities back online, why are we primarily seeing small-scale, sporadic drone strikes and a few commando infiltrations? Why not leverage that massive arsenal for a sustained bombardment of GCC targets?
It's a great question, and it comes down to the calculus of regime survival.
Regime survival.
Right. Iran favors deniable, proxy-enabled sabotage in these targeted strikes because a massive, sustained bombardment would instantly trigger a unified, overwhelming retaliation.
Oh, right.
If Tehran launches a full-scale missile barrage, the U.S., Israel, and the GCC would really have no choice but to respond with total force, potentially targeting the regime itself.
Which they obviously want to avoid.
Exactly. By keeping the violence somewhat ambiguous, utilizing proxies in Iraq or Yemen, and launching isolated drone strikes, Iran seeks to fracture the unity of the GCC.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah. They are attempting to deter the Gulf states from assisting any future U.S. operations by, constantly reminding them of their fragility, all while carefully keeping the temperature just below the boiling point of a total war.
And to understand who is carefully managing that temperature, we really have to look at the geopolitical chessboard. Because this current crisis did not emerge out of nowhere.
No, definitely not.
It is a direct reaction to the political shockwaves from earlier this year.
Right. The foundational context here is crucial. This entire escalation is the direct fallout from the U.S. and Israeli military strikes earlier in 2026, which resulted in the deaths of key Iranian leadership figures, most significantly Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
And when a figure like Khamenei is removed, it creates a massive power vacuum.
Huge.
Based on the reports, the IRGC has thoroughly stepped into that void and consolidated their control over the Iranian state. They are prioritizing a stance of absolute resistance, accelerating nuclear enrichment, and we're even seeing televised weapons training and military drills.
Well, for the IRGC, projecting strength internally right now is just as vital as projecting it externally.
To keep the population in check.
Exactly. They are navigating an incredibly fragile domestic situation following the loss of their supreme leader. The televised drills and the really aggressive regional posturing are designed to rally nationalist fervor.
It demonstrates that the state apparatus remains unbowed.
Right, and it effectively suppresses any potential internal dissent.
Meanwhile, from the U.S. perspective, the United States is operating under a strict ultimatum issued by President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The U.S. is currently maintaining a naval blockade on Iranian ports, basically choking off their traditional export routes, and they're signaling preparation for potential renewed military strikes. But the administration is also conditionally keeping the door open for diplomatic talks.
It is the textbook definition of a dual-track strategy. You apply maximum economic and military pressure, designed specifically to force the adversary toward a very specific diplomatic off-ramp.
But the danger there, of course, is that the margin for error is razor thin.
Oh, incredibly thin. When you have blockades, armed proxies, and newly recovered missile stockpiles all active in this very narrow geographic space, the risk of a strategic miscalculation is incredibly high.
Which is why third-party mediation is working in absolute overdrive right now. The reports highlight Pakistan's critical role here.
Yes, Pakistan is key.
Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi is actively engaged in shuttle diplomacy, traveling back and forth between Islamabad and Tehran to try and broker ceasefire agreements. Why is Pakistan the one stepping into the middle of this?
Well, Pakistan shares a long, complex border with Iran, but they also maintain deep economic and military ties with the Gulf states and the United States.
So they are uniquely positioned.
Very much so. They have a vested interest in presenting a border conflict that could easily spill over into their own territory. Their unique diplomatic positioning allows them to communicate with Tehran in ways that Western diplomats currently just cannot do.
That makes sense. And concurrently, the UAE is trying to organize collective defense mechanisms within the GCC, though it seems they are meeting resistance from neighbors who are terrified of being dragged into a wider war.
Right. The Gulf states are very divided on how aggressively to push back.
But what about the broader global powers? How are China and the European Union navigating this really delicate mediation process?
China is adopting a highly pragmatic approach. They rely heavily on Iranian oil, which gives them immense economic leverage. So they are quietly urging an end to the U.S. blockade to ensure their energy flows remain uninterrupted. But they are carefully avoiding public confrontation with Tehran to maintain their strategic partnership. They're walking a fine line.
And the EU.
The European Union, however, is taking a much harder diplomatic line. They are deeply concerned about both the regional instability and the accelerating nuclear enrichment.
Understandably.
So the EU is moving to heavily sanction and physically expel Iranian military attachés linked to the IRGC who are currently operating in Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a highly organized effort to sever Tehran's diplomatic reach and isolate their proxy influence on the continent itself.
So we've examined the closed-door diplomacy, the pipelines, the military maneuvers, but wars aren't just fought by attachés and navies.
Yeah.
Let's transition to the open-source reality.
Okay.
How are global citizens reacting to these developments? For this, the intelligence briefing relies heavily on social media sentiment, primarily tracking data from the platform X. It's pretty fascinating that we are literally using X hashtags and sentiment as a real-time geopolitical thermometer.
It is essential intelligence these days. Analyzing digital sentiment provides an unfiltered window into public perception. It reveals whether state messaging is actually working.
Right.
And the data gathered over the past 2 weeks shows a landscape that is highly polarized. But the predominant volume of sentiment is sharply negative toward the Iranian regime.
And the brief breaks the active digital conversation down into a few main camps. First, objectively, you have the pro-regime voices.
Right.
This camp is actively celebrating the IRGC's deterrence capabilities.
Yeah.
They frame the actions in the Strait of Hormuz, the supervision area, the tolls, as entirely justified acts of self-defense against Western aggression. And they are using the platform to mock U.S. and Western military restraint.
Yes. And on the other side of that digital divide are the anti-regime voices, a narrative driven very heavily by the Iranian diaspora.
Right, the diaspora is very vocal.
Very vocal. This group is expressing intense support for domestic protests within Iran itself. They forcefully condemn the IRGC's violence, the domestic executions, and all the regional proxy actions. Most notably, they are actively demanding decisive, unified international opposition to the government in Tehran.
So you have these two fiercely opposed camps. But if you're listening to this and wondering why your gas prices might spike next week, you aren't alone.
Definitely not.
Alongside those deeply entrenched political camps, there is a massive volume of discussion from neutral users globally. This demographic is expressing profound economic anxiety.
That's a huge theme.
They are closely watching the news, really worried about the immediate impacts on global oil prices, the ripple effects on inflation, and just broader market instability.
And that economic anxiety is perhaps the most telling data point. The highly engaged political sentiment clearly favors either regime change or strong opposition to the IRGC. However, the universal undercurrent, the sentiment shared by the vast majority of global users, is a deep, profound caution regarding a full-scale war.
People are scared of escalation.
Exactly. The open source intelligence confirms that while the world is deeply critical of Tehran's actions, there is zero widespread appetite for a devastating regional conflict. The global public, much like the cautious members of the GCC, overwhelmingly favors targeted de-escalation and diplomatic off-ramps over military confrontation.
That makes total sense. As we bring today's briefing to a close, let's summarize the most likely future events that decision makers and, you, our listener, need to watch for in the coming days.
Right.
The intelligence forecasts a continuation of what we discussed earlier. Calibrated intimidation in the Strait of Hormuz. We should expect to see ongoing naval harassment, threats to shipping lanes via these alternative financial schemes, and deniable proxy attacks across the region.
Yeah, the environment will remain in this state of controlled horizontal escalation. However, the intelligence assessment identifies a very specific tripwire.
The primary trigger for a massive, uncontrollable escalation.
Exactly, and that would be renewed direct U.S. or Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities or critical regime targets. That is the exact threshold that would transition this from a calculated proxy conflict into a broader, fully open regional war.
That's the red line everyone is watching.
It is.
Well, before we wrap up, a quick reminder about the platform that generated today's deep dive. Stylo News is a mobile and computer app that you can actually download yourself to customize your own personal intelligence style briefs.
It's an amazing tool.
It really is. It utilizes hundreds of traditional news sources alongside real-time data from X to keep you fully informed on the topics that matter most. For AI-powered news on demand, you can subscribe right now at www.stylonews.com.
Highly recommend checking it out.
All right, stepping away from the anchor desk for a moment, we really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Yes, thank you.
We know unpacking geopolitical conflict isn't exactly light listening, but understanding the mechanisms behind the headlines is really the first step to making sense of a very complex world.
We truly appreciate your curiosity and your time. It is a privilege to break these topics down with you.
It is, and we want to hear what you're curious about next. Please reach out, request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
We love hearing from you.
Now, to leave you with one final thought to mull over, based on the intelligence we reviewed today. We traditionally think of warfare strictly in terms of, contested airspace, ground troops, and blockaded naval lanes.
Right, the traditional domains.
But with Iran openly hinting that they might interfere with the subsea internet cables resting at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. How long until the physical infrastructure of our digital world becomes the primary hostage in the next major geopolitical conflict?
That is a vital, vital question for the decade ahead.
Something to think about. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.